Everyone is arguing about the casting of Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. Fine. That conversation was inevitable. When Christopher Nolan adapts Homer, casts one of the most famous women in mythology, drops the trailer into 2026, and hands the internet a match, congratulations, you've summoned the culture war kraken. And this time, it's not just internet noise. Greece's government reportedly wrote an open letter to Universal and Nolan, pointing out that a film built entirely on Greek mythology, partly filmed in Greece, doesn't appear to feature any Greek or Greek American actors in its major roles. That's not a hot take from a comment section. That's a foreign government's cultural ministry putting something in writing about a $250 million American tentpole. So no, I'm not going to pretend the casting debate doesn't exist. It exists, and it matters. And Hollywood has not earned the benefit of the doubt when it comes to old myths, old franchises, or old characters. But stopping at the casting debate is too small. Not because the debate is fake, it isn't. Because underneath it is something bigger. The Odyssey isn't just being sold as a movie. It's being sold as a theatrical event, a premium format event, a Christopher Nolan event. And once you sell a movie that way, the question changes. It's no longer just, what did Nolan change from Homer? The question becomes, what kind of movie-going future is Hollywood trying to sell us? And is the best version of this movie even the version most people can see? That's where this gets interesting. Chris here, the Critical Nerd. If you like box office math, Hollywood receipts, and franchise autopsies, do me a favor, hit like, subscribe, ring the bell, and all the usual rituals. And let's get into it. You've got Lupita Nyong'o reportedly playing Helen of Troy, one of the most famous figures in Western mythology. Critics argue this is Hollywood modernizing an established figure through diversity-first casting. Defenders argue mythology isn't documentary history, and Nolan's allowed to reinterpret. Both sides have a piece of the real argument. Mythology isn't a police report from Ithaca, but adaptation isn't a blank check either. And the Greece letter is proof that this isn't a fragile complaint. When the country the story is from is publicly asking, where are we in this? That's a production relations story with real weight, whether or not you think the underlying complaint is fair. So yes, people are going to argue about Helen, about race, about whether this is artistic license or another case of Hollywood using mythology as a costume rack for modern politics. That conversation was always going to happen. But the more revealing issue is this. While everyone argues about who Nolan cast, Nolan is quietly selling audiences on a version of cinema where the format may matter almost as much as the movie. And that's the bigger business story. The Odyssey isn't being positioned like a normal release. It's an event, a Christopher Nolan epic. Homer on the biggest screen possible. IMAX film cameras, premium formats, the whole cathedral of cinema pitch. And Nolan has earned that pitch more than almost anyone working today. Oppenheimer, a 3-hour R-rated biopic about theoretical physics, became a theatrical event and pulled in roughly $975 million worldwide on a $100 million budget. That should not have worked, and somehow it did. So when Nolan says the Odyssey should be seen big, people listen. The issue is what big now means. The marketing isn't just saying see it in theaters, it's showing audiences that different theaters give you literally different versions of the image. IMAX 70mm gives you the expanded frame. Digital IMAX gives you something else. Dolby gives you something else. Standard formats give you something else. And the official format comparison reportedly lets people configure their viewing like a gaming PC build. Which, when you think about it, it's kind of cool, but it's also a problem. Because what used to be a simple decision, do I want to see the movie, has become, do I want to see this movie correctly? If IMAX 70mm is the ideal version and only a small number of theaters can show it, what is everyone else buying? The movie or the compromised version of the movie? Nobody in Hollywood wants to say that part out loud because the moment you tell audiences there's a best version, you've told most of them they're getting something less. Now, to Nolan's credit, the demand is real. Advanced ticket demand for 70mm and IMAX shows reportedly got ridiculous. Hour-long queues, ticketing systems struggling, resale listings popping up at absurd prices for premium screenings. A listing price isn't a sale price, sure. But the fact that people are trying to scalp Odyssey tickets like it's the Super Bowl tells you Nolan has done what Hollywood claims it wants. Made people care about seeing a movie in a theater on the biggest screen as an event. Not eventually. Not on a couch with a DoorDash order arriving mid-second act. Here's what that trust is actually worth in dollars. Tenet. Arguably Nolan's worst received film, did $365 million worldwide during a pandemic, when half the planet's theaters were closed or running at reduced capacity. That's the floor. Oppenheimer nearly cleared $1 billion on a budget less than half of the Odysseys. Nolan is one of maybe 3 directors left whose name alone moves tickets regardless of subject matter. But here's the number that actually matters for this film. $250 million production budget, the most expensive of Nolan's career, typically comes with a marketing spend in the $100 to $150 million range. So let's just call it $375 million in total studio outlay conservatively. Domestic box office returns roughly 50% to the studio after theater splits. International averages closer to 40%. To clear that outlay on a global cume, you're looking at somewhere between $500 and $625 million worldwide just to get back to even. The IMAX 70mm sellouts are genuinely a good signal. But even at premium pricing, those screens are a rounding error against $500 million. The ticket frenzy proves the top of the demand curve is healthy. It tells you nothing about the middle and the bottom, which is where a $250 million movie actually makes its money. And the quiet part nobody wants to say, theatrical movies are becoming concerts. Same show, different seats, different price, different status. Get the right ticket, you get the real thing. Miss it? Enjoy the standard version and pretend you're not missing anything. Concerts have always worked that way. Movies weren't supposed to. The audience sat together. The screen was the screen. Everyone saw the same movie. Now the premium format isn't just nicer, it's marketed as more complete. That's a different psychological contract with the audience, and it matters. Because if Hollywood's answer to streaming is go bigger, but only a handful of cities get the biggest version, theatrical cinema starts looking less like mass culture and more like a VIP section with popcorn. And this is where the culture war loops back in, because the casting controversy and the IMAX controversy aren't separate stories. They're feeding each other. The casting debate gives the movie heat. People argue, clips circulate, outrage gets monetized. The format debate gives the movie prestige. This isn't just another Hollywood controversy. This is Nolan. This is IMAX. This is the sacred temple of cinema. So the Odyssey exists in 2 algorithmic lanes at once. Is Hollywood rewriting classical mythology for modern politics on one side? And will this be the definitive theatrical event of the year on the other? People who hate the casting are still talking about the movie. People who defend it are still talking about the movie. Film nerds are arguing aspect ratios while culture war accounts argue representation. And regular people are standing in the middle thinking, wait, do I need a guide to buy a movie ticket now? The culture war drives the clicks, but the format war reveals the business model. Hollywood has learned controversy creates awareness. Nolan is proving something more valuable. Scarcity creates urgency, and urgency, not awareness, is what studios actually need. Everyone knew The Flash existed. Everyone knew the Marvels existed. And a lot of people still stayed home. Now, I don't think Christopher Nolan is the villain of this story. I think he's one of the few directors still trying to preserve the idea that movies should feel like movies, not content, not IP delivery systems. And if any story deserves massive canvas, it's this one. The Trojan War, gods, monsters, ships, islands, homecoming. This is not a story about one guy in an apartment learning to forgive his dad. So I'm not mad at Nolan wants this scene in the best format possible. The problem is he's making the case for theatrical cinema at the exact moment the theatrical system is becoming more uneven than ever. Most theaters aren't IMAX 70mm. Most audiences don't live near one. Nolan is trying to preserve cinema. The studios are trying to monetize scarcity. Those aren't the same thing, even under the same IMAX branded hat. And if this works for Nolan, every studio will try to copy it badly. The same way one genius makes something work and 9 committees try to reproduce the outcome without the talent, timing, or trust that made it possible in the first place. Theatrical urgency isn't created by a logo. It's created by trust. Nolan has it. That's why people lined up early, and why the audience that complains loudest about Hollywood will still show up for a Nolan movie. Disney trained audiences to wait for streaming. Marvel trained them to do homework. Star Wars trained them to argue. Netflix trained them to forget a movie existed within 48 hours. Nolan trained audiences to buy a ticket. That's the gap Hollywood wants to close without doing the work. They want the Nolan result without the Nolan trust. Premium pricing without premium confidence. Event movie money without event movie discipline. And audiences aren't stupid. They know when something feels like an event, and they know when a studio is just pointing at a familiar logo and demanding applause. That's why cheap horror keeps winning and why nostalgia alone isn't enough anymore. Tiered cinema, it isn't automatically bad. IMAX can be amazing. A great theatrical presentation can turn a good movie into a memory. The problem starts when the industry acts like the standard ticket is no longer the real experience. Most people aren't format nerds comparing aspect ratios or refreshing apps to find one of 30 premium screens worldwide. Most people just want to know, can I see the movie? And if the answer becomes yes, but not the real version, that's one more reason for casual audiences already dealing with franchise fatigue, ticket prices, and concessions that need a home equity line, just completely opt out entirely. So yes, the casting backlash matters. It matters because it shows how fast artistic debates become moral sorting machines. And because Hollywood still hasn't learned that if you use old myths and old fan bases as marketing tools, people are going to ask you what you changed and why. But the casting fight isn't the whole story. The bigger story is that the Odyssey might be the clearest preview yet of where theatrical movies are headed. Not just bigger, but more divided. Not just premium, but more exclusive. See it in theaters becomes see it in the right theater in the right format before the tickets disappear. And here's the cautionary precedent worth sitting with. Joker Folie 2 also had a director with a strong authorial background, a marketing campaign built around serious artistic statement, and a trailer reception that ran cold with the mainstream audience the studio actually needed. It opened to $40 million domestic against a $200 million plus budget and never recovered. The lesson wasn't ambitious sequels can't work. It was that when prestige framing sells to a niche, while the content alienates the mass audience that funds the budget, the gap between the two groups becomes the opening weekend number. And opening weekend decides whether a film gets the benefit of the doubt for weeks 2 through 4 or gets written off by Monday. Nolan may have made the most ambitious theatrical movie of 2026. He may have also exposed the problem with theatrical's future. If the best version is only available to a tiny slice of the audience, Hollywood hasn't rebuilt the movie-going experience. It's built a VIP section and called it cinema. That might work for Nolan. Whether it clears $500 to $625 million worldwide is a very different question. And we'll know that answer within about 72 hours of release. So let me know, is Nolan saving theatrical cinema by making the format matter again? Or is the Odyssey proof the real movie-going experience is becoming too expensive, too limited, and too complicated for normal audiences? Drop it in the comments down below, and as always, keep your expectations low and your receipts high. I'm the Critical Nerd, and I am out.